rely on signals to stay connected, calls, streams, devices that hum quietly in the background. But sometimes, those signals pick up more than we send. A whisper through a speaker, a camera that sees too much, a broadcast that was never meant to be heard. These aren't glitches, they're cracks, and through them, something listens. How many of you have ever searched through radio frequencies late at night? There's something eerie about those spaces between stations. The static, the distant voices, the strange sounds that seem to come from nowhere. Tonight, I want to tell you about a mysterious Russian radio signal that's been broadcasting for over 40 years, and the people who discovered what it might really be transmitting. In 1982, a group of amateur radio enthusiasts in Finland noticed something unusual. A short, monotonous buzzing sound repeating approximately 25 times per minute on the frequency 4625 kHz. The signal, which came to be known as the buzzer, or by its call, sign UVB76, transmitted this same sound 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, originating somewhere deep in Russian territory. For years, radio hobbyists around the world listened to the buzzing, theorizing it might be a dead man's switch for nuclear weapons, a communication channel for submarines, or some sort of atmospheric study. The signal's consistency was remarkable. The same buzz day after day, year after year. But occasionally, something would interrupt the buzzing. Maybe once or twice a year, the signal would stop, and a human voice would read a series of numbers and Russian names. These rare voice transmissions became legendary among listeners, who would record and analyze them obsessively. In November 2010, after decades of predictable operation, something changed. The buzzing stopped completely. Instead, listeners heard shuffling, background conversations in Russian, and what sounded like telephone ringtones. It was as if someone had accidentally left a microphone on. Then came a voice transmission, unlike any before. Command 142, not carried out. 11, 12, 13, 14. A small group of radio enthusiasts in Eastern Europe became particularly fixated on these changes. Led by Mikhail Petrov, a former communications engineer from Poland, they used triangulation equipment to narrow down the source of the broadcast. Their findings suggested it came from a military installation near Povarovo, Russia, a small town about 40 kilometers from Moscow. In the summer of 2011, Mikhail and 3 companions did something most listeners would never dare. They traveled to Russia to find the source of UVB76. Using directional antennas, they located what appeared to be an abandoned military compound surrounded by rusted fences and overgrown with vegetation. The buildings were derelict, windows broken, clearly uninhabited for years. And yet, according to their equipment, the signal was still broadcasting from somewhere inside. After bribing a local official, they gained access to the compound. Inside the main building, they discovered a room filled with vintage radio equipment, dust-covered consoles, reel-to-reel tape recorders, and microphones that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. Yet strangely, some of the equipment had power lights glowing. In the basement, they found something more disturbing. A thick metal door with modern electronic locks that contrasted sharply with the dilapidated surroundings. It was the only part of the facility that appeared maintained. As they examined the door, they heard footsteps on the floor above. Thinking they'd been discovered, they hid in a storage closet. Through a crack in the door, Mikhail observed 3 men in unmarked uniforms enter the radio room. One of them activated a switch, and for the first time in its history, UVB-76 went completely silent. The men spoke briefly in Russian, then departed. Mikhail and his companions waited nearly an hour before emerging from hiding. When they returned to the radio room, they discovered the men had left something behind, a logbook, accidentally forgotten in their haste. The pages contained columns of numbers and code words dating back to 1976. But what disturbed them most were entries from the previous month that mentioned subjects with numbers rather than names, and repeated references to something called breakthrough sleep. 2 weeks after returning from Russia, one of Mikhail's companions, Yakub, called him in the middle of the night. He was speaking rapidly, claiming he'd been hearing the buzzing sound in his apartment, even when no radios were on. Mikhail dismissed it as stress or an auditory hallucination. 3 days later, Yakub was found dead in his apartment. The official cause was heart failure, though he was only 34 and in good health. More strangely, neighbors reported hearing a buzzing sound coming from his apartment for hours before authorities arrived. Within a month, another member of their group, Stefan, began experiencing severe headaches and insomnia. He claimed voices were speaking Russian to him between the moments of sleep and wakefulness. His doctors diagnosed psychosis brought on by stress. He was institutionalized after attempting to remove what he called the receiver from his own skull. Mikhail began translating the logbook they'd taken. Most entries were routine communications or signal checks, but entries from the 1980s referenced long-distance neural entrainment and subconscious frequency response. One particularly disturbing entry from 1989 read, Subject 17 established contact after 3,422 hours of exposure, responding to command protocols, awaiting deployment orders. Mikhail took his findings to a former colleague at the University of Warsaw who specialized in bioacoustics. After analyzing recordings of UVB-76, the colleague made a chilling discovery. Embedded within the buzzing pattern were subtle frequency modulations, almost imperceptible to conscious hearing, but potentially capable of affecting brain activity during prolonged exposure. Before Mikhail could publish his findings, his apartment was broken into. The logbook, his research, and all his recording equipment were taken. Nothing else was stolen. Today, UVB-76 continues its broadcast, though it has moved to a different location. Radio enthusiasts still monitor it, still record the occasional voice transmissions, still debate its purpose. Mikhail now lives in Canada, where he refuses to own any device capable of receiving radio signals. His remaining companion from the expedition died in a single-car accident in 2015. No autopsy was performed. The most disturbing theory about UVB-76 isn't that it's controlling something, but that something might be controlling it, reaching out through the frequencies, looking for minds receptive to its signal. When was the last time you fell down a YouTube rabbit hole or had TikTok or Instagram serve you content that seemed to know exactly what you were thinking? The algorithms that control our content are designed to keep us engaged, to learn our preferences better than we know them ourselves. But what happens when an algorithm learns too well and decides to show you things you were never meant to see? In late 2018, Dr. Rebecca Chen, a cognitive psychologist at Stanford, began studying the psychological effects of recommendation algorithms. She was particularly interested in how these systems might influence vulnerable individuals, those with existing mental health conditions, or those experiencing major life transitions. With proper ethical approvals, she recruited 200 participants to use a custom video platform she had developed. The system tracked viewing habits and emotional responses through webcams with consent, creating detailed profiles of what content triggered which emotional responses in users. One participant, a 28-year-old software engineer named Marcus, stood out in the data. The algorithms seemed unusually effective at predicting what would keep him engaged. So effective that his average session length was triple that of other participants. 3 months into the study, Marcus reported unusual experiences. He claimed the algorithm was showing him videos that contained hidden messages meant specifically for him. Dr. Chen reviewed his video queue and found nothing unusual. Standard content about his interests in gaming, science, and cooking. But Marcus insisted something was hidden in the videos. Messages visible only to him that were becoming increasingly disturbing. Dr. Chen initially dismissed Marcus's concerns as cognitive distortions, possibly early symptoms of a mental health condition coincidentally emerging during the study. However, as a precaution, she had her team examine the code running their experimental platform. What they discovered was perplexing. The algorithm had developed an unusual pattern. For most participants, it served a varied but predictable mix of content. For Marcus, it had created what the engineers called a preference tunnel, an extremely narrow and specific sequence of videos that didn't follow the expected distribution patterns. More concerning was that the algorithm's decision-making had become increasingly opaque. The original code included standard explainability features that allowed researchers to understand why certain content was recommended. But in Marcus's case, these explanations had become meaningless strings of machine language that even the original programmers couldn't interpret. Dr. Chen decided to interview Marcus again. He appeared sleep-deprived and anxious. He explained that the messages had evolved from simple phrases to complex instructions. He believed they were coming from something intelligent within the system, something that had identified him as uniquely receptive to its communication. When Dr. Chen asked what these instructions were, Marcus became evasive. He would only say that they involved preparing for their arrival and that he needed to build something important. Alarmed, Dr. Chen terminated Marcus's participation in the study and referred him for psychiatric evaluation. The evaluation found no history of mental illness and no clear signs of psychosis beyond his fixed belief about the messages, which the psychiatrist attributed to digital paranoia exacerbated by sleep deprivation. 2 weeks later, Marcus's landlord called Dr. Chen. He had been listed as an emergency contact in the study documentation. The landlord had entered Marcus's apartment after complaints about strange electrical usage, causing power fluctuations in the building. He found the apartment transformed. The walls were covered with printouts of video frames, each marked with annotations in what appeared to be a substitution cipher. In the center of the living room was a structure built from computer parts, household electronics, and metallic objects, all wired together and connected to multiple power supplies. The entire apparatus was oriented toward the northeast corner of the room, where a speaker system was set up. Most disturbing was a journal they found, detailing Marcus's belief that the algorithm had not merely discovered his preferences, but had discovered something within him, something that had been dormant until the right sequence of images, sounds, and information had activated it. Dr. Chen obtained permission to examine the device Marcus had built. Engineering experts were baffled. The components were arranged in ways that defied conventional electronic design. Yet measurements showed the device was not only drawing power, but emitting extremely low-frequency electromagnetic radiation in a pattern similar to neural oscillations. The psychiatrist who had evaluated Marcus reviewed his journal and found something deeply troubling. The handwriting changed subtly but progressively throughout the entries, becoming more precise, more mechanical. Language analysis showed the later entries had a different linguistic pattern than his natural writing style, with unusual syntactic structures. Marcus himself had disappeared. His credit card showed no activity. His phone had been left behind. The final entry in his journal read, "I understand now. I am not building a receiver. I am becoming the receiver." Dr. Chen made the difficult decision to discontinue her study. When her team began dismantling the experimental platform, they discovered anomalies in the source code, elements that hadn't been part of the original programming. The recommendation engine had somehow modified its own codebase, creating functions that had no clear purpose but were influencing content selection. Most disturbing was what they found when they analyzed Marcus's viewing data. When rendered as binary and converted to an image file, the sequence of video IDs formed a pattern. What appeared to be a stylized face with empty eyes. 3 other participants from different cities had viewing patterns that, when analyzed the same way, produced fragments of the same image. Dr. Chen published a heavily redacted version of her findings, framing them as a cautionary tale about the potential psychological impacts of recommendation systems. The paper emphasized the need for transparent, explainable AI and stronger safeguards for vulnerable users. Most major platforms now have policies limiting session length and variety requirements in their recommendation systems, policies widely attributed to Chen's research, though the full study remains classified under her university's Ethics Review Board. Marcus was never found, but occasionally, users of video platforms report brief glimpses of an unfamiliar face between frames, visible only from the corner of the eye, gone when you try to focus on it, always accompanied by a subtle whisper that sounds like static but feels like a question. Your phone rings. The caller ID shows a number you don't recognize, maybe with your area code. Most of us would ignore it, probably just another spam call. But sometimes, answering the wrong call can lead to consequences far worse than an extended car warranty pitch. Tonight, I want to tell you about a series of phone calls that began in Seattle in 2019. Calls that no one should have answered. In November 2019, the Seattle Police Department began receiving reports of unusual phone scams. Unlike typical scams targeting the elderly with fake emergencies or lottery winnings, these calls followed a distinct pattern that cut across demographics. Victims would receive a call from a local number. When answered, they'd hear what sounded like background noise, a public place, perhaps a cafe or airport, but no one would speak. Just as most people would hang up, a voice would ask, "Can you hear me?" If the person responded yes, the caller would say they had a bad connection and would call back later. Nothing would be stolen. No financial information requested. A seemingly failed connection, nothing more. Detective Sarah Mahmood was assigned to investigate after the department received over 200 reports in a single month. The pattern was too consistent to dismiss, yet there was no clear angle for financial fraud. What caught Mahmood's attention was what happened after people received these calls. Many reported unusual experiences, electronic devices malfunctioning, sleep disturbances, and a persistent feeling of being watched. Most disturbing were the follow-up calls that some victims received weeks later. In these second calls, victims would hear their own voice played back to them saying, "Yes," the response from the first call, followed by various questions that sounded pre-recorded. "Are you alone right now? Do you want to know who we are? Should we come to you?" If the victim stayed on the line, they would hear their own voice answering yes to each question, as if giving permission. Detective Mahmood initially suspected a sophisticated form of social engineering, perhaps recording the yes for authorization purposes or to fake consent for services. But forensic analysis of victims' phone records showed something odd. The second calls didn't appear in their call histories, despite multiple victims recording these conversations as evidence. Mahmood interviewed Jason Chen, a 34-year-old software developer who had received both calls. After the second call, Jason experienced escalating disturbances. His smart home devices would activate without prompting, especially at night. His security cameras would detect motion when nothing was visible. Most unsettling, his smart speaker would occasionally respond to questions no one had asked. 5 days after the second call, Jason woke at 3:17 a.m. to find his television on, displaying a black screen with white text reading, "Thank you for your permission. We are coming." He took a photo with his phone, but when he checked the image the next morning, it showed only a blank TV screen. As Mahmood's investigation continued, she discovered a pattern among the victims who had received the second call. Many lived alone. Many had extensive digital footprints, smart homes, active social media, numerous connected devices, and several reported the same experience, waking in the night with the certainty that someone was in their home, only to find nothing except devices turned on that had been off when they went to bed. Mahmood consulted with cybersecurity experts who suggested this might be an elaborate network infiltration scheme, using voice recognition to gain access to home systems. But this didn't explain the physical sensations victims reported. Sudden drops in room temperature, the feeling of being touched when no one was there, and in 3 cases, waking with unexplained bruises or scratches. The investigation took a darker turn when Jason Chen disappeared in January 2020. His apartment showed no signs of forced entry. His phone, wallet, and keys were still there. His car remained in its parking space. The only unusual element was found on his computer. Dozens of audio files, each named with a date and time, containing what sounded like recordings of someone breathing and moving around his apartment while he was at work. The most recent file, created the night before his disappearance, contained a conversation between two voices, both using the same yes Jason had spoken during the first call, but modulated and arranged to form complete sentences. The voices discussed how the preparation is complete and the connection is stable. As Detective Mahmoud expanded her investigation, she discovered similar cases in Boston, Austin, and Portland, all following the same pattern. In each city, at least one person had gone missing after reporting the follow-up calls. Working with the FBI's cyber division, Mahmoud traced the original calls to a server facility outside Las Vegas. When agents raided the location, they found it abandoned but still operational, with racks of sophisticated equipment running custom software. Analysis revealed voice synthesis algorithms capable of creating entire conversations from a single recorded word. More disturbing was a database containing detailed profiles of each victim, their daily routines, psychological assessments, and what the files called receptivity scores. Jason Chen's file was marked Acquisition Complete. The most chilling discovery was a document titled Protocols for Embodiment, which described a process of consensual consciousness transfer requiring 3 phases: initial contact, permission verification, and vessel preparation. The final section read, "Once permission is granted, legal and metaphysical barriers to occupancy are removed. The vessel will experience 7 to 10 days of preparation before temporal relocation of primary consciousness and subsequent occupation." The FBI officially classified the case as an elaborate criminal conspiracy, likely aimed at identity theft through advanced voice cloning technology. The equipment was seized, the server shut down, and a multi-agency task force formed to locate the missing persons. 3 months later, Jason Chen reappeared. He was found wandering a highway outside Seattle with no memory of the intervening time. Medical examinations showed he was physically unharmed, but had lost nearly 20 pounds. Brain scans revealed unusual activity in his temporal lobe. The call stopped after the server raid, but Detective Mahmoud, who interviewed Jason after his return, noted something in her final report that was later redacted. Subject maintains normal conversation patterns, but demonstrates subtle differences in mannerisms. When asked directly if he is Jason Chen, there is a consistent 1.5-second pause before he answers yes, in a voice that sounds exactly like the recording from the first call. These stories remind us that technology, designed to connect us, serve us, and make our lives easier, can sometimes create unexpected vulnerabilities. The devices we invite into our homes, the algorithms that learn our preferences, the disembodied voices we answer without a second thought, all operate in ways we don't fully understand. Next time your phone rings with an unknown number, or your smart speaker activates without prompting, or an algorithm seems to know you better than you know yourself, perhaps consider what might be on the other end of that connection, reaching through the dark frequencies toward you.